Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to a new episode of our video podcast. Have you seen my camel? This is your host Ziad Ali.
And your co host Radwaji. In this show, we discuss the struggles of Arabs and Muslims. We debunk stereotypes about Muslims as well.
If you're listening to this podcast on any podcast platform, you can also watch it on YouTube on our channel Masri Tribe Worldwide. You can find the link in the description. And today we're discussing the complications of being born to a revert. Coming up.
Okay, so in the beginning, why don't you, Sarah, go ahead and introduce yourself?
Right, so my name's Sarrah. I am 23 years old. I'm an American Egyptian, born in the US, lived part of my life in Egypt. My mom's a revert. My dad's Egyptian, born and raised Muslim. My mom was born Christian and, of course, converted to Islam later in life. I lived part of my life in Egypt. Most of my life has been in the US. I'm a current nurse, finished high school here, went to college here, and I've been working since I was 17. And then I finally graduated, got my nurse's degree, and now I'm doing what I've been waiting to do most of my life, alhamdulillah.
So, Sarah, tell me when and why did your mom revert?
So my mom was born Christian. Her family is still Christian. They're all devout Christians. She converted at the age of 23. She was in college at that time. So she was taking an Islamic studies class in college, and there was things that they brought up in the class. So she was like, okay, that's not what I remember being told when I was younger. Like I'd heard the opposite. So she did more, she educated herself quite a bit. She had a lot of Arab Muslim friends. She worked in the international office, so she was able to talk to people who were Muslim. And she had a lot of friends that she started to get to know that also were reverts who had talked about their journey to Islam, what they liked about Islam. And she'd been going to a mosque to learn through that. So at the age of 23, which was probably like in the 80s. I can't tell you exactly when, because if I do, she'll be salty because she'll be like, first of all, that shows my age. Second of all, I don't even know what year it was, but she was 23. So she ended up converting. And she said the biggest thing for her was Islam made sense. There was always an answer to the questions that she had, which is something that I always relay back to my life where, if I have a question of something Islamically, truly that has been a true statement for me. So that's particularly why she converted.
So, how was it back then? I mean, in the 80s and living in Ohio, and I think Ohio is not that liberal, probably, not California. So,
Yeah.
how was it back then?
So to my knowledge, my mom didn't cover until later in life. So after she'd married my dad and she had my sister that was after me, that's the time that she'd covered. So to everybody else's knowledge, she still seemed like she wasn't Muslim because, she's white, blonde. So she doesn't look Muslim. That's how they like to put it. So to my knowledge, she didn't have a lot of lashback except when she'd stated she was Muslim. I know with her family in particular, it's hard when you raise your child in a particular faith and they take a different route. That's with any family, whether you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, of any whatever background it may be.
Exactly.
So I know that it was hard for them to accept that. But alhamdulillah, thankful to God that they'd never wanted, cut her off or wanted nothing to do with her. So they still kept her in their life. And thankfully, it's even till today, we're still very close. So back then, to my knowledge, there wasn't a lot of discrimination, I think, prior to 9/11. It was just kind of why would you convert? Especially that the area that her family lives in is Christian dominant. Even when I go now, I'm I don't really see any Muslims except if you go to the city, which is in Columbus. So she never really talked about being discriminated against back then. A lot of times it was questions, and it was more from family. But other than that, she lived in Cincinnati, which has a big Muslim community. And the college that she went to had a big Muslim community, and a lot of the friends that she'd had accepted her for who she was. So I know that she was thankful for that.
But you mentioned that her family accepted her. My question would be, like how are they, like nowadays, how are they accepting to you and your sisters? Do they like ever mention or bring up religion, or is it like, okay, we're family, so that's
Yeah.
it is what it is?
Yeah. So my he's a devout Christian. So Christianity and the church is a big part of his life. So being, with us growing up and being involved with him, I know that that was such a big topic for him. He would talk about going to church and Bible study, even till today. So for us personally as kids, we're used to hearing it like, oh yeah, I went to Bible study. We talked about this. It was something very open, like it opened my mind and made me think a little differently about things. When it comes down to the way that we practice, I can tell that it's hard for them to accept as a group, as a whole. I know that they don't care that we're Muslim. It's one of those things that it's like, all right, you do you. But it's one of those things that I know it's hard for them to connect, because it's like, all right, that's something different. We don't necessarily agree. And then, of course, that changes also our political views in some ways, our view on the world in some ways, which with the worldview, it goes hand in hand with politics. So I know that that's a hard thing for them. There's some individuals in the family who have made comments about like, you're too beautiful. You don't have to cover. I don't know why you have to cover. I don't know why you have to be like that. And I know it's when when the comments are made. Me and my sisters are very sassy, smart individuals when we answer. So like we sometimes have to watch our mouths, because it's like, listen, they don't get it. And it's not the whole. There's just like particular individuals I'm talking about. But as a group, they just accept us for who we are. They know if we go upstairs, we're going upstairs to pray. We don't usually like voice it. It's different than with them. I think, they can be like, oh yeah, we're going to pray. Okay. Let's bow our heads for the food, things like that. But, did that answer your question?
Yeah. But then like them being actually religious Christians, doesn't it kind of goes hand in hand, or not goes hand in hand, but I'm not sure how to phrase my question, but that them knowing that you're a practicing Muslim, isn't it like better than you just being like, at the end of the day, we kind of have similar beliefs. It's just the way we practice our religions are different, but we believe in Christianity and it's very similar to what they believe in. Like our beliefs are kind of similar. So isn't it like a good thing that you're still a practicing Muslim? You're not just like a non-practicing Christian, for example. Or for them, it doesn't work like that.
I don't know. I've never actually thought about that, to be honest. I've never thought about, isn't it better that at least we're practicing a faith rather than being of their same faith, and not practicing? I don't know. I know that the basis of us having as Muslims, we have to accept that Judaism and Islam came before. Judaism and Christianity came before Islam. That's like a basis. If you don't accept those as Muslims, like you can't be Muslim.
That's a part of our religion.
Exactly. So I've talked to him about that multiple times. So them knowing that we have the same basis, we believe in the 10 Commandments, we believe in Moses, we believe in Jesus. In a different context, we don't see Jesus as being God, but we see him as a very important prophet that was revealed. The Bible was revealed to him. So I know that he accepts that. I think it's hard to accept that there's a lot of similarities too, because when you're devout in a religion, a lot of times that's the only way that you see. So it's hard to accept that people believe in something else. Personally, of course, through having my mom being a Revert and having my mom's side of the family be Christian, my dad's side of the family be Muslim, it's opened my eyes to the similarities and to the differences. But you also, I feel, with being Muslim, you're more accepting that there's things that came previous. So you don't necessarily say, oh, no, that's wrong. That's not it. But for them, they don't believe Islam came after. So it's a harder thing to accept.
Makes
but
sense.
I don't know if it would be any better to be a non-practicing Christian. Because I think with them, it would be still like, you should come to church. You should try to go to Bible study. You should try to do these things. So there will always be something that you could be better.
So, Sarah, I have a question. Why didn't you consider it? I mean, like when they ask you to go to the church, I mean, like earlier when you were like 16, like a teenager, why didn't you consider? I mean, like back then, probably most of us would feel like we're still in between things. We're
Yeah.
open to a lot of new ideas. We can probably take it in and like think, yeah, why don't I go there? Why don't I try to listen? So why
Yeah.
didn't you even consider?
So there's a few things with that. Growing up, I know that this is one of the might be in a different episode, but I know one of the difficulties growing up with my mom being a revert and with my dad being a Muslim is trying to figure out how to raise your kids Muslim and how to not get them confused early in life and how to like parenting is hard nonetheless, but like trying to figure out how do you want to raise them. And I know one of the things is my dad didn't want us to talk too much about church and about all these things that were outside of them because he didn't want to confuse us early on. As we got older, so in my teenage years, like later, in high school, I did go to church with my grandpa. I've gone a couple different times. I've gone to his Bible study. We've had weddings we've gone to that's in church. So of course they read verses out of the Bible, they sing. So I have been to church and I have seen how they worship and how different that is than what we do. I'm still open because I'd like to go to a Southern Baptist church and see how they preach. Just that's something that I'm very curious about. So as I've gotten older, I've allowed myself to go, and I've wanted to go because at least I see how that is. So I know that meant a lot to my grandpa, seeing me go with him. To at least, to just go with him because that's such a big part of his life.
Exactly.
But why I never considered, going considered any other religion other than Islam, if that's like a question that you have, like, did I ever have like an open mind of like, what about Christianity? You question through life, like, is this religion for me? Like, does it make sense? And that's where I always relay back to what my mom said, is there's always an answer to every question that you have Islamically. So if someone tells you that's just how it is, that's not correct because there's always an answer. There's always a hadith. There's always a verse. There's always something that can answer your question.
True.
Unless it's something very modern and then you got to do some extra research and things like that. But that's why I never considered anything other than Islam. But I have gone to churches and I think it's important for people to go and see things that are outside of your deen or outside of your religion that helps solidify where you're at and or at least broaden your understanding and your mindset and education knowledge.
And like I'm not sure if this question was meant to be religious wise or not, but like how did you feel the difference was being raised to a revert Muslim to a born Muslim parent?
Like being raised in a mixed home.
Yeah, like when you just had some religion related questions, who did you go to? And like I would think, or people usually would think that the revert person would have more answers because they've done their search. They weren't just born Muslims and they just accepted the fact.
Yeah.
So for you, how did things work?
So being raised in a mixed home, when we had questions, it was kind of mixed. So, some reverts, when they convert, they delve deep. They try to see and try to figure out as much as they can. And then other reverts, when they convert, they're trying to find their way and they gain knowledge as they go through time. And I think my mom was someone, she knew a lot, but she's also been someone that has tried to learn through time. And when she married my dad, I think she also was seeking for someone to, you want to gain iman and knowledge with the person that you're with. That's part of, marriage. So I know that was a big thing for her. So when we'd had questions, I would ask her. If she didn't know, I'd ask my dad. And most of the time, my dad would be able to find it for us or be able to tell us. And with being raised in a mixed home, culture wasn't really part of, like, we didn't have like a huge cultural influence. It was all specifically deen. Alhamdulillah, like, I'm thankful to God for that because it changes your way of practicing and the way of going through life. So it was just particularly deen. So,
and I believe this is how it should be, that like we reference back to our deen, not to our culture.
Yes, which is crazy because it's the opposite of how the world is driven. But yes. So I'd ask them both. My mom knew a lot. I think even, she talked about when she'd first married my dad, she'd known how to pray, but she was like, can you solidify this is how you pray? And he watched her and he like corrected her in some ways. But even things like that, like you're supposed to build together. So learning how to pray, I remember sitting beside my mom at like 3 or 4, and you pray with your mom, and my mom's pregnant with my other sister, and so like I remember praying behind my dad, praying beside my mom, going to the masjid, trying to fast, Eids, things like that. So you remember that from a young age, and them trying to teach the lessons of what this is.
And do you recall like any time that this was actually a rather challenging sorry, it was actually rather challenging that you had like mixed family, mixed home, or like
Yeah.
what you call it?
Yeah. Mixed home, like, and I think it's mixed of when it comes down to culture, because you have an American and you have an Egyptian, so they're from two different places.
But
So
like religion wise, did you ever find it challenging?
I think religion wise, no, the only challenge that I might like reference back to is like choosing the holidays to celebrate, because my mom was raised, she'd celebrated Christmas, she'd celebrated Easter, Thanksgiving, Halloween, did all the things. When she converted, prior to, because she met my dad 9 years after converting. She converted at 23 and she married him at around 32 years old. So it was years after. She would still went to Christmas, with her family. She'd still done things. She didn't necessarily celebrate it, but she was there with her family. So once again, that relays back to when we were young. My dad's like, I don't want them celebrating birthdays. I don't want them celebrating Christmas. I don't want them celebrating Easter. These aren't Islamic holidays. The only Islamic holidays is Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr, and that's it. And it's hard for, even till today, like even us girls, it's hard to be in an environment that's non-Muslim or even Muslim. Like living in Egypt, they still celebrated Christmas and they still celebrated, not even
New
Thanksgiving,
Year's
but
Eve.
yes, New Year's Eve. They celebrated birthdays, which was a huge thing for me, because I was like, you weren't allowed to celebrate birthdays. Like that wasn't a thing. I think till the age of 3 we celebrated it, and my dad was like, no, we need to just, he just became more practicing and more religious in his ways. And they, because you're trying to figure out, how do I raise kids Islamically in a non-Muslim country? And then you move to Egypt, and then you're like, well, I'm still trying to figure out how to incorporate just Islam when there's so much other than that. So I know that was probably the biggest challenge, and it's still been a challenge till today, because when we moved back later in life, and we are all older, my mom was like, birthdays are just very important for me to celebrate. So then they, for them to have something special, because they didn't have that growing up, and they see their friends having it, they see their cousins having it. And so we started celebrating birthdays, but wasn't anything big. It would just be us girls and my mom. My grandpa would come, we'd have a cake, we'd sing happy birthday, and we just visit, so it wasn't anything ever big. We never had huge parties. I think the biggest party was when I was in Egypt and you'd had my birthday at your house. That was like one of the biggest parties. And then this year I've had a lot of different people celebrate my birthday, which was so odd, because I'm like, I'm at work, like, and I'm turning 23, but like, why are people singing to me? Like, why is there something so big? And it's because I've been used to that all my life too. So.
And Sarah, do you think like being raised by two born and raised Muslims would be different? Like, I don't know, but I feel that it's a bit challenging, and like being born Muslim and with the culture different too. So, I mean, like if both parents are born and raised Muslim, and they would have like the same values, because that culture is an influence. It's
Yeah.
it's a given. So with that, do you feel like there would be like a big difference between being raised with a revert mom and being raised by a born and raised Muslim?
I think that it was different in the case of, just like you said, like culture is such a huge drive for a lot of families that come from the same culture. So and you guys can speak on Egyptian parents, like you guys being raised in your household, deen was very important. So it was stressed in the household. Deen was very important in my household. And it was stressed because my mom, this was such a huge value for her, because she'd chosen this way of life. And then for my dad, that was something that was important for him too. So they had that basis. If you're two people that have a basis that you just like each other, and cool, we want to get married, but you never discuss like what's the importance of that foundation that I want for my kids, which I think with you, when you have a revert and then and you marry her, a lot of times they're going to be like, I want to make sure to incorporate Islam in their life. It's like an actual topic that they talk about when they sit down together. Like, what are you wanting, when you have kids, like, how do you feel about that? With a lot of, I find with people who are either and I'm going to talk particularly Egyptian because that's, the specialty, that's my other half. They're not going to sit together and be like, so how do you want to raise your kids? It's not like that. It's just like, we're going to have kids. They're going to be Muslim. They're going to be like this. This is what it's not even
Inshallah, it's
going to
gonna
be.
work out.
Yes, inshallah, it's going to work out. Allah's got us.
Yeah.
We'll be fine. So it's not really a topic. And I've experienced that in my own life where, I've had that question because I know of how important it is or how it was stressed in our life. And it was particularly a topic that was talked about. So, when I meet people, that's things that I ask is like, so like, how do you want to raise your kids? Like, what do you think is acceptable? Birthday is obviously something that I bring up. Like, so are you cool with celebrating things? Like
You're
things like
not.
that. You want to
You're
know
not.
what them.
You're not scared of scaring them away.
Listen, if they get scared, what am I going to do about it? Because that's not my problem. My problem is if you can't be on the same basis as me, then I'm sorry. But no, I mean, you got to ask questions because that's your partner for the rest of your life. If it ends up being the rest of your life, and if it's not, then it's not, and that's just how it is. So.
And then I believe this should be the last question. At what age did you find out, or were you told that your mom was a revert, or did you figure it out? What age did you find out that your mom was a revert?
So I knew that my mom was white. Okay. And my dad was like a caramel man. So that's how I remember it as a kid. Like my parents were two different colors and, like that. And that's how you view it as a child. And then we moved to Egypt and people are like, why are you so white? And why is your hair blonde? Even though it's not blonde, but it's like, why is it blonde? So you're like, I don't know. And they're like, so where's your dad from? I'm like, Egypt. And they're like, where's your mom from? America. That's why. And then I'm like, wait a minute, like that became a thing. I was like, what do you mean? So I was more fascinated about that. There are two people from two different places and they came together. And I knew my mom's family was Christian and I knew that she was Muslim, but I didn't think about anything until I was about like maybe close to my teens, like maybe 10, 11, 12 was times that I started asking her like, so you converted, like, how did that work? Like, and then now me being 23, it's like, all right, I know the whole story. She was born and raised in the countryside, like in Marion, Ohio, like a small city in Ohio. And she'd gone to a city and she'd went to actually a Catholic college. And that's when she took put on an Islamic study class in
So
college.
they did have Islamic studies in a Catholic college?
So it's part of being well-rounded with the educations. They'll teach you different.
I think this is
That's
like
so cool.
under the umbrella of comparative religions, right?
Yes. So I took a Bible and Quran studies when I was in college. And it taught you Judaism, Christianity, Islam. So it went through like the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran. It doesn't go in depth, but it teaches you the basis of these religions and, their diet and practices.
Do you think it actually makes a lot of people question their religion or no?
So I think it can be a back and forth. Depends on who you are. Are you looking for something? Or are you someone that already has a basis and you're trying to gain knowledge on other religions? Because me personally, I knew nothing about Judaism. Never knew nothing. I only knew that that's the first religion that came, and then we had Christianity, and then we had Islam. So that class was very beneficial for me, especially that it was taught by a Jewish professor. So, he very much went in depth with it. So we were able to learn, what Judaism was, what's their practice, what's their diet, what's their importances. And then we went on to Christianity, which then I had a bigger knowledge base. And then I went on to Islam. And it was me and my friend, we were the only Muslims in that class, which then we were like, all right, we can represent and something's brought up. And then everyone else was mostly Christian and they had a lot of people question things because he's just teaching things. It wasn't necessarily to convince you about a religion, but he'll talk about the goods and the bads or the things that make sense and things that don't. So, you listen and you try to think about, your own things. And it caused me to like have to do more research on things because I'm like, wait a minute, like, what do you mean? Like some of these questions that he'd asked. So, and I know some people take these classes to find religion. And I don't think my mom took it to find religion, but it happened to be that they brought up that the Kaaba was the direction that we pray towards, because we believe that that's like the center of the universe, like the seven heavens is above that. And she was like, that's not what I learned when I was younger. Like I'd learned that the Kaaba was God, was the Muslim God. Like that's who they were worshiping. That's what they were worshiping. And so
That's
she was
why
like,
we pray looking for like
that's why we
in the direction
pray
of
for
Kaaba. Okay, makes
it's
sense.
our God. So she'd of course been like, wait a minute. So what else? Like, you try to go in depth, like, what do you mean? Like, what else? And she'd ask questions. and, met a lot of different Muslims and realized it wasn't anything that she thought of or been educated on at a younger age. It had been quite different. Same thing with wearing hijab, like, being something that's actually oppressed on us. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not what that is. Like, that's not why you wear it, things like that. So just a lot of education.
I know I'm going off topic right now of the question I just asked, but do you think, or did your mom ever think that it was on Muslims that they didn't, like, the non-Muslims didn't have enough knowledge about Islam, or like, as you just mentioned, she had like wrong thoughts about Islam? Do you think it's on Muslims that we did this? Like, we didn't give people enough knowledge about our religion?
That's a good question. I know that through time, social media and having internet has changed a lot of things because it's allowed for a lot of people. Like, if you have a question, you don't have to ask a Muslim. Like, you can just Google it. You can Google it, check a whole bunch of different links, try to do some research. You can go to a masjid now. I think it's half and half. Maybe people didn't speak up very much. I wasn't alive back then, so I don't know how much I can speak on that. But the other thing too is you have people that are part of different religious institutions, and I don't think, because particularly with my mom, I think the individual that spoke about all the things that he spoke about was not knowledgeable on Islam and just brought up kind of like anything to be like, yes, this is why it's not correct and this is why we're not about it, rather than actually try to be like, well, this is what they believe, but for us, this is our basis. Because I don't know the context of what he was preaching.
Okay, so Sarah, you mentioned that you figured out that your mom was a revert like around 14. So
10, 11, 12.
How did it feel back then? Like, did it confuse you, or or did it enforce your faith? What did it feel like?
So I think that was the beginning of when I started asking more questions, especially that we were living in Egypt during that time. So I started just kind of wondering how she found Islam, kind of did some more research. Didn't even do research at that time. It was later in life, but that was the beginning. So I think it was confusing of like, how did you find Islam? Like, why Islam? Like, so it took some time until like now for me to be like, oh, this makes sense, and it pieced it together. And the thing is it's her journey. Everyone has their own journey. Reverts have their own journey. Even just us being born and raised Muslims have our own journey. But with them, it's just how, the succession of finding Islam, trying to live it, whether they maintain it or leave it, and, different life events that either keep you with it or you just kind of peace out. That makes sense.
So to wrap this up, like, would you say that you prefer being born to born and raised Muslims, or you're fine with what you got?
You know what? I'm fine with what I got. Like, God blesses everybody with their own journey and with the family that you have. I think the biggest benefit of me being born into the household that I've been born into is it really has opened my mind as an individual. It really gives you a broadened view of the world, that the world is bigger than just Islam. Like, there's more out there, which is hard when you are just born to one thing and everything around you is that. A lot of Christians, they're born to Christianity. That's it. And they don't really hear anything else until later on, high school, college. And they're like, why is there a hijabi in my class? Why is she sitting beside me? And why does she talk? Like, where they're like, what is happening? So I think that it has allowed me to be the person I am today. And I have a pretty broad view of the world, and, I just continue to try to build on that. And I always suggest for people, you go to a church and see how they worship. It will give you an idea of how they worship and why they worship that way. And it just broadens your view of the community around you, because it's more than just you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing your experience with us today. We really appreciate having you today. Thank you all for listening. If you did like today's episode, remember to subscribe for the coming episodes. You can find our social media handles and YouTube channel posted in the description below. If you have any comments or questions, please email us at seenmycamel@gmail.com, or you can just leave it down in the comment box below. Assalamu alaikum, and see you next time.